If we leave grain on here on the rest of these roof sheets, and we leave it and it gets moisture and then it rusts, the only good way to replace that is to crane the entire top half of your dryer off, bring it down to the ground, build you a new roof, fly it back up. Extremely, extremely expensive repair. All can be avoided. That's stainless steel. All that can be avoided by just cleaning the dryer at the end of the year. Again, it's not fun. I know guys have got sticks and pokers and all sorts of things, but it's very important to get that clean. Other items of cleaning, just basic housekeeping, right? The grain exchangers, they all have these clean outs on them. Some dryers have them on the inside. It's very important to get those clean. That's another not so fun one. You got to get a stick in there, a screwdriver, a punch or something and poke around. It can be time consuming. Nobody likes to do it, but it's very important. Right here is our divider hopper. I'm sure anybody here who owns a tower dryer has been warned that is the most common place for a grain fire. Dust builds up right here. It's exactly the floor where the heating section and the cooling section separate. We get a lot of fines build up there, especially over the year. It gets harder. We go and fire that dryer up. It gets hot. It catches on fire because it's not going to meter. It's not going to continually move. It's just going to stay there and catch on fire. Obviously, right here in the cooling section, we get throughout the year when there's not grain on it, we get water that comes in there. It sits on top of it. Again, that is a stainless steel floor or galvanized in some models, but it still will deteriorate. It still will rust. If you move these access covers, different models have them in different places, that'll allow that grain or the water, moisture, fines, whatever else to flow down into the unload floor where we can get it cleaned out. The burner, we all have had to drill a burner at some time depending on what model dryer you've had. I know everybody knows it's a pain in the butt. We hire seasonal guys to do it. It's the least favorite thing my guys do. So what we can do there at the end of the year, let's make sure we get it just 100% clean. All of the fines, all the debris you can. I know when you're emptying the dryer, you get more fines, right? So you clean it off. I know throughout the year as more stuff falls through, maybe a distributor's leaking into the dryer a little bit, it's going to fill up again. That's where we're going to tarp it, keep it clean. And then a lot of guys will spray their manifold cleaner. I've heard a guy say that he used Pam and it works great. I don't know, maybe your wife might get mad if you take Pam out of the house to take to the elevator, but that's what I've been told. These holes on the older dryers are 5/64. We're going to talk a little bit about maintaining those burners here in a bit, but if you have a newer dryer, it's going to be aluminum alloy. You probably won't have to drill it. The older dryers, a 5/64, real long 6-inch bit will get it clean for you. That's again something you can do. If you got just a few holes at the end of harvest, maybe drill them out and then spray them down and cover the burner up. After harvest, again, a few final things. We want to make sure, like I was saying, get all the water out. Water is the number one element that's going to kill your tower dryer. If it's not a fire, I actually think water is probably worse for it. So on the Zimmerman dryers or any Sukups or the flat bottom sweeps, the Brocks are similar too. We're going to have some clean outs on the bottom of the dryer. These ones are not for a fire. It's not so you can pull it if you have a column catch or a column get plugged. It's strictly to let the water out. That's why we have them there. That's what the manufacturer wants you to do. We want to keep the water off there. If you have an older style hopper bottom or a Barrico or something of that nature, we want to pull that discharge out. A lot of guys, I've seen them put a plug on the back end, the tail end of a conveyor. Anything you can do to allow that moisture to go out. I've heard horror stories of guys firing up in the middle of winter. They said they ran the metering drum, it was fine. They ran the unload conveyor, and then they snapped the chain in half, right? Because there's 4 inches of water down in the base of the conveyor. It'll happen. It'll rip it all apart. Final thing, gas train right here. There's a ball valve on there for a reason. It's probably not big enough. It'd be worth your while in the winter time. Maybe every once in a while poke a piece of welding rod or something of that nature up there. Make sure that water's coming down. The other item, which I don't think you can see it here, but you got a 3/8 copper tube that goes up to the burner as well. It's a pilot. Doesn't matter how good you have the burner covered, you're still going to get a little bit of moisture in there, whether it's condensation, etc. That's going to be able to come down into the gas train. If it does get in your gas train, there's a little CV valve right here. We'll discuss that a little later on too, but you can have some real operational issues. If we get water in there and it freezes, we'll make a little C. You'll tell me your dryer's not coming up to heat. I'll tell you that you broke your CV valve. You say, I'm wrong. You had the drain open all year. Then we'll finally take it apart. There'll be a big C, and a day's worth of downtime later, we'll put a new one on and go from there. So a recap on the end of season, right? We want to clean the inner roof, make sure our grain exchangers are cleaned out, check the divider hopper just so no one at the beginning of next year fires it up without cleaning it, get our burner cleaned, covered, sprayed, and then make sure the cooling floor and the unload floor are ready. Make water can get out of there. Okay, moving on to preventive maintenance. In tower dryers, it's really common, right? We all call it a pre-season. Everybody's got their pre-season guy. There's companies that do nothing but pre-season it, or pre-seasons all year long. There's guys that have go state to state and follow the harvest. They do pre-seasons. The main idea of a pre-season is to pinpoint any problems you're going to have, try to avoid downtime, do preventive maintenance like greasing, etc. Make sure the dryer is safe and operational, ready for harvest. During this, so we got a few things, right? There's big checklists. The manufacturer, when you get the GSI dryer, a Zimmerman dryer, a Sukup dryer, they'll have preventive maintenance items. You can go down, hit the checklist. A few things they're going to have you do: lubricate everything, check fill all the gear cases, make sure the pipe train's in good and working order, clean out the control panel, make sure your belts, motor sheaves are all good, make sure the blowers start up, everything lights up. This is just something a service tech is going to do to make sure you guys are ready to go as soon as the trucks start rolling in. I'll get into all this in a little more detail here in a minute. Okay, our unloads and our metering. So there's several different kinds of unload devices just within the same model of dryers over vintages. Right here we've got the Zimmerman Sweep. Sukup is very similar to that as well. It's a flat bottom dryer. It's going to go along with the UHMW paddles and knock the corn out. This is a metering drum on a GSI dryer. It's a hopper bottom. Again, just meters the corn out, it's a big cone. So starting on the old Zimmerman dryers, which I don't have a picture of, if you have augers as your unloads, that's very common in Illinois. They sold a ton of them being out of Litchfield at the beginning. You've got a gearbox on the outside of your dryer, you've got a gearbox on the inside of your dryer, then you've got another two-piece gearbox with the augers attached to it. You want to make sure all those are full on oil. They've got vents. You want to make sure the vents are clean. Make sure all the plugs or all the oil's up to the check plugs. On the hopper bottoms here, there's a couple different varieties of these gearboxes. It's called a Sumitomo. Some of them are grease-filled, some of them are oil-filled. If you've got issues with them leaking, more than likely somebody at some time drained them, put a grease zerk on them, and they filled them all the way up. You just want to make sure there's something in there. They're very slow revolutions, so they don't need oil necessarily. They could be grease-filled. Moving on to our blowers and our belts. So when we're greasing, we always get the question, right, do we grease our motors? There's a hit or miss topic right there. If you've never greased your motor before and you've got a dryer that's been around for 25 years with a 100 horsepower motor on it, you've never greased it, I wouldn't start now, right? You're going to pump grease into the windings. You might, because the seals are worn or dried out or however it is, wouldn't start now. Manufacturer specification on the newer dryers say that they want 1 pump per 10 horsepower. Some of the other dryers do have, or blower motors, sorry, do have a relief plug where you could take out the relief plug, pump grease until you see it, run the motor a little bit, check it again. On the blowers on a tower dryer, if it's any sort of tower, they typically have a blower, not an axial fan, which means it's got its own separate set of bearings just for the blower. There's top and bottom. The bottom bearing, you guys are going to want to fill that up until you see grease relieve from the seal or somewhere of that nature, spinning the belts as you go, and then count your pumps. When you get to 50, depending on if the dryer's greased every year, depending on how many hours you run, that's typically around the numbers we're seeing. Hit your top zerk and do the exact same amount. You want to check your blower belts. The belts should be even from shiv to blower. Make sure those are all even. Make sure the belts are tensioned. Manufacturer specification on the belts is you should be able to push them in 1 finger's width per belt, or not push it past the belt. You got to be careful on tower dryer blower belts and blowers. They use a V-groove belt, which can actually is a little too robust for this application if you ask me. People say their belts get loose. What's happening is they're not really stretching. They're V belts, they're 1 inch thick, they don't stretch. What's happening is they're wearing down and they're sitting deeper and deeper in the shiv. The more you tighten these belts up, you're going to put stress on the motor and eventually throw the bearing on the motor. Belts are cheap. If your belts continuously get loose throughout the season or belts get loose throughout the year after year, don't keep tightening them up. Get some new belts, new V-grooves that sit on the shiv and they won't sit in there. Another good indicator is you look at your shiv, the belt should stick out past the groove of the shiv just a little bit. If it's buried all the way in there, you should probably replace your belts. Pipe train inspection, we talked a little bit about that. you want to look at your max-on valves, CV valves, and ball valves. Make sure they're all moving freely. If there's rust and corrosion in there, you're going to feel resistance. You shouldn't have anything on the CV valves, the ball valves, or your max-ons. Max-on valves are, again, really, really expensive. They're made of cast. They will not give. If you get water in them and they freeze, they just crack. They explode. They will not stretch. So that's something you want to check before harvest, be looking at. Max-on valves are expensive due to that. Not everybody carries them. We do stock a few. I know GSI has some. I know you can get them places, but they come few and far between during harvest. So that's something you want to make sure is in order before you get going. Make sure all your gauges are working on the dryers. If your gauges aren't working and you call and try to get somebody to troubleshoot you over the phone, the very first thing they're going to ask is what's the pressure, incoming pressure. If you can't tell them that, then they're not going to be able to help you out a whole lot. There's drains and vents. There's vents on your regulator. There's vents on the pilot solenoid. You want to make sure those are clean. If there was construction going on your site, another dryer was added. If there was construction going on down the road, you want to make sure those vents have been cleaned out. You want to make sure there's not a bunch of debris in your gas train. It can also cause you headache and capacity issues down the road. Control panels. There's companies around that will come and give an infrared camera on your control panel. You can do that. We've done it on a few facilities and found some pretty significant issues with old starters, one leg being hotter than the other. But the biggest way you can avoid that is just make sure all the connections are tight, make sure your starter's in good working order, make sure the heater is working. Every panel for any tower dryer, portable dryer that's out there, they typically have a little heater in them. It's 110 volts. The issue is it comes off the main power control transformer. So if you want to shut your dryer down in the wintertime, like most people do, the heater's not going to work. We encourage either have somebody or yourself or an electrician wire the 110 heater into a separate circuit. That way you can keep it on in the wintertime. I know it's more and more common with remote monitoring. People put their actual operator's panel in the office or in the electrical room. That will help with some of those controls, especially as we get into the touch screens, etc. You can obviously clean out the vacuum everything out, keep the debris out. That'll keep from holding moisture, and then blow the air switch lines out with the compressor. We talked a little bit about the burner earlier, but I'm going to double back on that. Like I said, the old dryers had a 5/64 bit. It's about a 6-inch long bit. They're special. You can get them at Fastenal. You can get them. You're not going to find it at your regular hardware store, though. When you're drilling those burners out, you want to make sure you're going all the way through. If you get a 1/2 inch in and it stops, it's probably an old bit in there. There's maybe some rust or corrosion. You're going to have to go all the way in, a couple inches in. The new burners are aluminum alloy. Thank God Maxon started doing that so that we're not all sitting up there for a day or two drilling burners out. Those can still get clogged. The way a tower dryer works is it's high volume, low pressure. We come in and we can operate a tower dryer with as little as 8 pounds. Normal air compressor, when you're just blowing it out, you're blowing about 15 or 20. So it's not going to blow those holes clean. Even on the aluminum alloy, if you get dust and debris in there, it's not going to blow them out. You're going to have to get up there with a big air compressor, poke them out with a T-handle or something like that, get the holes clean. If you don't, and your dryer's coming up to temperature really slowly, that could be a pretty good indicator that you've got a burner that's clogged. While you're up there, make sure your flame rod is not grounded. You can have all sorts of communication issues and interference if that spark plug or the flame rod are touching the side of the burner can instead of the porcelain touching it. And make sure the connections are good on there, and make sure that all your wire for your spark plug and your flame rod wire are not touching each other, because you'll get interference that way as well. Along with the preseason, typically you'll get a report. This is a report that we've done, actually a tower dryer not too far down the road from here. We just identify a few issues, right? This close to harvest, we can't replace everything. We got patch sheets, unload motors, older. These are controls issues that we're not going to be able to take care of right now. That's why it's so important to follow up with the service provider or get these repairs on your list to take care of directly after harvest, just because there's only so much time. Here in the report, follow up with some pictures. This is an old DC motor on a dryer that's around this area. If that dryer goes down in the middle of harvest, that DC motor, those parts are obsolete. They're looking at a 2-day conversion to get that changed out. It's time consuming. You can't afford to be down for 2 days, and I can't afford to get 2 service techs out there. So something to keep in mind. Rounding back up, safety and success during harvest. Obviously, when you guys are getting in and out of the dryer, I know it's hectic during harvest. You want to make sure you're locking things out, tagging things out. You don't want the new guy there, your seasonal help, turning on the unload conveyor because another truck came in. He's going to fire up the dryer. You're in there cleaning it out. It can be very dangerous. Obviously, be very careful during harvest. I know things can get pushed back. Inspect ladders and catwalks prior to harvest. That's during harvest. You don't want to be worrying about the ladder falling apart as you're running up there in the middle of the night to check it out and overheat or something like that. So again, that's something to keep an eye on. Make the replacements you need to and the repairs in the off season. Be careful entering and exiting the burner. Still to this day, anybody who's ever worked on a tower dryer again knows that getting on and off the burner is not a fun thing. There are some alternatives now. There's a couple companies that have fall prevention systems that can be mounted over the burner. They're expensive, but they're a good thing because, like I said, it's very uncomfortable climbing over that. I'm going to move on to, it's a little bit more about what Bob was talking about, efficiency of drying and why this is important, right? This happens to be part of the preseason as you bring in your seasonal help, as you guys are looking at how you're going to run, looking at the types of grain coming in this year. There's a few things we want to look at. Housekeeping, we're going to look at training our operators and watchdog systems and capacity checks. Housekeeping and efficiency. I hear all the time when I show up and somebody's telling me we're not making capacity, the dryer's not doing what it's supposed to, and I say, well, thing's covered in red dog from the outside, you can't clean it. They say, well, we can't afford to shut down. The office told us we can't shut down. Well, my answer to that is you can't afford not to. There's some models of dryers come with a static pressure gauge. It's a Magna-Helix system. We've installed these aftermarket on a few tower dryers around the area. They seem to be, Darren can tell us, or Darren and Matt, they're good. They help you, give you some good information. What it allows us to see is that if the dryer is basically working too hard or not. The way, again, on most tower dryers, they've got a blower in there. The way those blowers work is they can only shove out as much air as they can suck in, or they can only suck in as much air as they can push out. If your dryer's covered with dust on the inside, the outside, however it is, and it can't breathe, those blowers are going to run slower and slower. They're not going to fight, they're not going to shove it out. They're just going to sit there and run slower and slower. You're going to waste electricity, waste time, and the dryer's not going to make capacity. Static pressure gauge can be added aftermarket to tell you when you've hit the threshold of it's time to stop, shut down, clean it out, take an hour, and get back up and running. They're perforated for a reason. The air needs to go across it, grain, especially in the heat section, but as well as in the cool section. If you're right by a truck dump, you need to keep an eye on it, right? If we're not getting that grain cooled down, we're going to have issues with quality. If we're not cooling it down in a slow manner and we're throwing it in the bin still hot, or we're leaving it out, putting it in a pile hot, we're going to have stress from cracking, etc. It's very important that that dryer is clean. Training our operators. Like I know everybody here has a guy in their neighborhood, or especially in the country elevators, got a guy in the neighborhood, he just comes and he dries for us every night during harvest. That's what he's done for the last 20 years. He says he's got it, he knows the dryer. Well, he may not understand the grain, right? We need to talk about every aspect of that dryer with this guy. We talk about the importance of running the dryer efficiently, cost effectiveness, etc. A few things we don't talk about very often. I've got brand new dryers that we put out. I've got dryers that have been out for 30 years. Everybody tells me the same thing. We never mess with the louvers. We don't know what they're for. So we're going to get into that too. We need to keep the dryer full of grain, and we need to make sure our operators understand that we have the set or the unload speed set correctly. Whoops, I guess not. Maybe I just need to talk about it. Louvers. I don't know if I've got this later on my PowerPoint now or not, but the louvers for the Sukup dryers, the Brock dryers, the Zimmermans, and the GSI dryers. 5 points or less of moisture is what the dryer is rated for. If you're taking anything 5 points or less, we want the louvers closed. What that's going to do is allow us to suck more air across the grain down in the cooling section. It will cool it down better. We'll have better quality grain. If you're trying to do any more than 5 points of moisture, which I know in this area we do all year long, we want to open those louvers up. What that's going to do is it's going to make the actual grain a little hotter. It's going to be able to suck more air in through the windows, get it up to the heat section. It's not going to pull as much air across the dryer sheets down in the cooling section and cool our grain, so we're going to have hotter grain coming out. You'll get more capacity, but you also have to deal with having grain come out. You got to maybe put it to a smaller bin with more air and then transfer it to another bin, or you just get to decide what's more important, quality or capacity. Again, we're going back to temperature, training your operators, etc. Grain For some reason, corn likes to dry at 200 degrees. There's several charts that show it's not even a linear equation. They're not parallel. Grain from 150 degrees to 160 degrees, there's a giant capacity jump. From 170, there's a big jump. 180, there's a big jump. And then 190 to 200 degrees, the amount of capacity increase is insane. Right here, from a cost standpoint and a capacity. Right here, if we're starting at, we're trying to come in at 20, come out at 15% moisture. Same thing over here. The difference, the only variable we changed was temperature. We're going to go from, if we're drying at 200 degrees, a 4,700 hour dryer will get about 4,700 bushels. If we're drying at 150 degrees, rather this is beans or whatever, we're coming down, we're going to lose capacity, about 1,000 bushels an hour. The other problem we're going to have here is we're going to start paying more per bushel to dry. It is harder to dry that grain. If you get towards the end of the year, people say they don't want to run their unload fast because they think that's beating up the grain. You may not be able to afford to run your unload slower and turn your temperature down. You're wasting time, you're wasting fuel. Run the dryer at 200 degrees if you can afford the quality of grain. If you're cracking grain, obviously that's a different thing, but these dryers and grain are both set up to run at 200 degrees. Again, going back to training your operators here, there's something called the shrink factor. I think Bob touched on this a little bit too. But there's a formula here talking about 25% grain coming in, we're going to dry it down to 15. We have the same exact million bushels of grain. If we bring it in at 25% and then dry it down to 13 because the operator wasn't paying attention, because he didn't want to get hollered at for having it too wet because he wanted to make the train. Either way, we're going to end up, by the time this is all said and done, we're going to lose about 20,000 bushels of grain over that million bushels. Not to mention the operator took more time, it costs more money, just by those 2 points. Pretty big deal. We've got another one here as far as for the cost of drying down for another 3 cents. So if we're drying from 25 to 15, we're going to pay about 24 cents a bushel. If we're going from 25 to 13, we're going to pay 36 cents a bushel. The next thing, which is probably the most common issue with a dryer of any sort, is airflow, right? So I'm going to touch base on the blowers and the motors again. Direction has to be correct. I can't tell you, I bet at least 2 or 3 times a year, a motor goes out, another company puts it in, they wire it up backwards, it runs halfway through the season, we get towards the end of the year, somebody tells me their dryer's not making capacity, we eventually get out there, they've had a blower running in the wrong direction for 2 months, right? That's a pretty big deal. The way that can happen, and shouldn't, is right here, this air switch. The air switch isn't adjusted correctly. Those are the little copper tubes you guys see run up the side of the dryer. Portables have them. Every model dryer has some form of an air switch. Those air switches aren't set correctly. Another blower will turn on the air switch saying, yeah, that motor's running. Even though it's running the wrong direction, it's actually sucking instead of blowing air. It causes a lot of headaches. The other thing is you have construction going on in your site. For some reason they changed some electrical wiring around, redid the main. All the motors could be going backwards, and only one of the motors could be going backwards. Again, it's something you might not know, something that's worth your time to check out real quick, especially if you think you have capacity issues. Belt tightness, we talked a little bit about the V-belts, how they sit in the sheaves. We want to make sure that they're level with each other. From motor to motor, it's not as important, but from motor to from motor to blower, we want to make sure those are level. That'll keep from wearing out belts, as well as get our max RPMs. Dryer must be filling properly. These tower dryers, again, are so dependent on static pressure. If we've got grain that's not completely full on the top side of one dryer and it's open and the air is allowed to escape through the perforated sheets on the top, one indicator you'll be getting a high overheat. Your top right, top left, top overheat all the time. If you don't, more importantly, what we got to understand though is we're just losing time, wasting money, we're blowing heat out. The top of a 10,000 bushel an hour dryer will store about 800 bushels of grain. That 800 bushels should be getting preheated before it starts metering down the dryer. If it's not, and all the heat's blowing out, there's 800 bushels that we've got to reheat as soon as it gets into the columns. Again, we're wasting gas, wasting air, wasting time. We want to make sure the dryers stay as full as possible. The roof must be sealed to the sides of the dryer. If it's not, then again, we're losing heat out the top. We want to fill those dryers as absolutely full as we can without popping the roof. That's why there's adjustable choke tubes inside outside the dryer for your inlet assembly. At the beginning of the year, you guys may have to take a couple off, right, to get the 30% grain kind of piled up. Angular repose on 30% grain versus 15% grain is extremely different. So then as the season goes on, you get higher grain. You put a few of those back on so that way we don't toxic leach. Right now, there is a couple manufacturers working on some adjustable ones, so you don't have to get up there and bolt it down. They're also working on some adjustable indicators. But for now, it's going to take you, the operator, whoever your dryer operator is, you have to really watch that thing and get the max capacity out of your tower dryer. I talked a little bit about the louver doors already, but less than 5 points of moisture, keep them closed. More than 5 points, don't open the louvers. Just understand the grain's going to come out hotter. It's not going to cool it as much. You got to be a little more careful watching your columns, etc. Dryer screens need to be cleaned out often during harvest. Keep that dryer breathing. So again, these dryers are not magic. They're awesome, but they're not magic. They're rated at 5 points of moisture. That's the Sukup, the Brock's, the Zimmerman's. If you see that it says it's a 10,000 bushel an hour, that means you're only taking 5 points out. Anything more than that, it's not going to do it. 200 degrees at 5 points is how all these tower dryers are supposed to be rated. That's how the portables are typically marketed and advertised as, but that's what they're going to do. If for some reason you, again, feel like you're not making capacity and you feel like the issue is heat, you want to make sure are your burner ports open? When were the burners last drilled? And was the burner covered between use? Did you have water in the gas train? Are we constantly trying to fight moisture or water that's in that gas train? Is the gas not getting by appropriately? All those things. Is the modulating valve opening all the way? During preseason, did somebody take it apart, not put it back together? Now we're starving for gas. It's running wide open all the time. Can't make temperature that way. That's something to look at. You want to make sure it's clear, full of obstructions. And again, if you had construction on your side, if you had construction down the road, if they did some gas line upgrades, you want to make sure those vents are clear, that there's nothing in the gas line. Heat chamber temperature should be similar to what the operating temperature. So if your display says 180 degrees, that's really what it should be up in the dryer. If it says 200, it should be 200, give or take. We have some probes. A lot of guys have a external temperature probe that they'll put up there and run down just to verify that their control's reading accurate. You can do something as simple as putting a meat thermometer in there. If you go up, drill a little hole on your heat section door, stick that thermometer in there, verify that it's very close to what your control's saying. If your control's telling you that you're running at 160 and you're running at 150, that's 10 degrees off. That's, again, another big deal. Grain is not going to dry at the correct temperature. The unload, a tower dryer, again, every model around this area, it should run at about 1.5 times the max capacity of the dryer. That way, if you're drying 2% grain, or only taking 2 points out, you can really cook it along, or if you're just running grain through the dryer, because that's the way your material handling is set up, it should be able to do 1.5 times the max capacity of the dryer. If you're at 50% on the newer tower dryers, that means you're at full capacity. I don't know why they didn't scale it to 100, but just because we have that issue a lot. 50 is 100. It's kind of messed up, but that's what it is. We want to make sure the sweep's going the correct way. We want to make sure that the UHMW guides on our sweep are the right size. We've had some people there's a few dryers that got shipped out that had the wrong size UHMW sweeps, and for a long time they couldn't make capacity unloading the dryer. It's something you can check out, and then make sure the sweep's running level, it's not higher on one side, the floor is not buckled, etc. Just make sure we're pulling grain as fast as we can. And that's all I got. So, are there any questions? Pre-seasons or tower dryers or anything of that nature? That's it. Good enough for me.